Hi there and welcome to this video in the IBM Cloud Foundation Skill Series. And in this video we're going to take a really quick look at what at the time of recording is a brand new service that recently launched in IBM Cloud, and it's called Code Engine. And if you're a developer or an architect that's looking for somewhere to run workloads really quickly and easily, then this is actually something that is really quite exciting. So the first question you might be asking is, well, what is Code Engine? Well, it's an IBM Cloud service that provides a fully managed serverless platform that runs containerized workloads. Or to put it another way, it's a service that allows you to run applications, jobs, microservices or event-driven functions in a containerized environment that you don't have to build or manage. So all you need to do is create your source code and then deploy it to Code Engine, and Code Engine does the rest to run the code and can even build container images for you if you don't already have them. So it does all this based on a Kubernetes platform, which is essentially abstracted from the user, which basically means that you don't see or even need to manage Kubernetes. So as it says there, it's like a Kubernetes platform without the hassle of Kubernetes itself. So here are a few use cases for code engines, which I've listed. So lots of developers are used to creating containerized applications or are getting into creating applications that can be running containers. But one of the issues with containers is that you need to have a skill set that allows you to then manage Kubernetes clusters so that your applications can then run efficiently and securely as well. Now, if you don't have that skill set or the budget to attain one, or you don't have the budget to either skill yourself up or hire in someone to do it for you, or maybe the budget to run an always-on Kubernetes cluster, then Code Engine gets around that, and we'll see more on costs in a moment. Next, if you have a workload that spikes, well, in a Kubernetes environment, you need to have a cluster that has the resources available to handle those spikes. And again, that can push up costs. So since Code Engine can automatically scale along with your workload, you don't need to factor in cluster overhead. So again, this reduces the cost management effort and makes spiking workloads a really good use case for Code Engine. Batch jobs are also a good use case. So consider a batch job that runs once a month and processes payment information. So most of the time the batch job does nothing, but when it's started it might need to consume lots of CPU and memory, as well as integrate with storage as well. So with Code Engine, jobs like this can be deployed and they'll cost nothing while they're actually inactive. They can then be activated, so once a month, and then allocated the resources that they need to run and execute. And because Code Engine will integrate with other IBM Cloud services, such as object storage, it can do all of its processing in a highly available environment, create outputs such as invoices, so there may be PDFs perhaps, which are then stored in object storage, and then the job will stop without incurring any other execution costs or any other costs until the next time that it's run. So the last use case I'll highlight is for proof of concept. So you might be developing an application that you want to try out as you go along, but you don't really want the cost of a fully dedicated Kubernetes cluster for the time being. Well, again, you can use Code Engines to run your small-scale application in its design or proof of concept phases, so you can make sure that you're on the right track and make sure that you then get the buy-in to expand the project before actually building and deploying a dedicated Kubernetes environment, which can be quite expensive. So once you do get past that proof of concept stage and you want to have a dedicated Kubernetes environment, you can then just redeploy your application to Kubernetes without any changes to what you've already developed and run on Code Engine. So these are 4 really good reasons to actually employ the use of Code Engine. So in terms of how Code Engine actually works, I've already mentioned that behind the scenes you've got a fully managed Kubernetes environment, and that's what runs your containerized workload. So the environment is public or shared, but of course IBM takes care of the security aspects around that and makes sure that your workloads are separated from those workloads of other users. The environment is deployed into IBM Cloud's multi-zone regions, or MZRs. So at the time of recording, and bear in mind Code Engine became generally available just a couple of weeks ago, Code Engine is available from Frankfurt, Dallas and Tokyo, so a good global spread of MZRs, and I'm sure that over the coming months we're probably going to see it deployed in lots more MZRs across the globe as well. Now, because they are in MZRs, that means the underlying service is deployed across 3 zones or data centers. So it's kind of like deploying a workload into a multi-zone cluster. So if one of the zones fails, and that happens to be the zone in which your particular workload is running, then the service will automatically redeploy your workload in one of the remaining zones, and that provides 99.99% availability, which is pretty good. Now, if you want to have protection against a whole region being knocked out by a large-scale disaster, then you can also do that by just simply deploying a workload across multiple regions and using a service like Cloud Internet Services to provide global load balancing capabilities. Now, in the last slide, I mentioned Code Engine scalability capabilities. And basically, when you deploy workload, you can set your scaling parameters. So minimally, you can have 0 instances of your workload. So, by default, it runs nothing. But you can set that right up to 250 instances if you like as well. So again, this allows you to manage your costs while at the same time having the on-demand capacity to actually service your users as well. Now, in terms of deploying and managing your workloads, you can do that either through the console, and I'll show you an example of that in the next video, or you can use the IBM Cloud CLI as well, or command line interface, to deploy and manage too. So let's quickly look at how Code Engine is priced, and it's principally based on a pay for what you use model. So if you're not running anything, you don't pay for anything, and this is obviously where Code Engine scores heavily over running a dedicated Kubernetes cluster environment if that cluster spends a lot of time not executing an awful lot of workload. So first of all, Code Engine has a free tier, so essentially you can experiment and build without any cost in the first place. So to have a go with Code Engine typically won't cost you a penny, and that free tier amount resets every month. Thereafter, you'll build based on the amount of vCPU and memory that your workload then consumes, and these tend to be described in terms of CPU hours and gigabyte hours, and the prices you'll see are presented in terms of very small fractions of US cent per second. You'll also have charges for incoming HTTP calls to your workloads, and again, this is charged per million calls. If you want to get deeper into pricing, then there's a page in the documentation that sets it out really well. I'll put a link on the screen to that particular page. But the main thing to remember is that you essentially pay for what you use, and while nothing is running and consuming Code Engine resources, then the costs are 0. Okay, well, that's a very high-level view of what is actually a pretty detailed and exciting service. So if you want to learn more about Code Engine, then take a look at the online documentation that's available through the IBM Cloud Console. There's some links to some pretty good tutorials in there which will show you how to deploy different workload types. And of course, you can get into all the finer details around deployment scenarios, scaling, pricing, high availability, things like quota limits and so on and so on. So that's it for this video. I hope it's given you a decent overview of what Code Engine is and provided you some thoughts on how you might actually go and use it. I'd recommend that you go and give it a try, maybe use some of the tutorials in the documentation, because again, that'll give you a really good feeling as to how Code Engine actually works. In the next video, I'll show you how simple it is to deploy an existing containerized application using Code Engine. But in the meantime, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please feel free to subscribe to my channel. But in any case, I'll see you next time.